I'm telling you, man, something about the smell of these old antique model kits. Yeah, it's like intoxicating. Wait, the camera's rolling? Oh, son of a... Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with another model showcase video for this 1/72nd scaled M163 self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. Now, unlike many of the other small-scale build videos that are showcased on the ECA channel, where at that point I mentioned that I often take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. With this model here being 1/72nd, that's not a scale that I actively work in, nor is it a scale that I offer commission build services in. This model here is built solely for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, if anyone is interested in a scale that I do offer commission build services in, I can be reached by the email address which is listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. There we can talk about pricing and timeline information. Now, the model here is built predominantly out of the box. However, I did add several scratch-built additions to this model that we'll be going over in more depth in this video. In addition to that, we're also going to be reviewing the base starter kit. So stay tuned because there's a lot of info coming at you. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle here is the M163 VADS, which is an abbreviation for the Vulcan Air Defense System. This self-propelled anti-aircraft gun was developed by the US military in the mid to late 1960s. This vehicle is essentially the M61 Vulcan rotary cannon system, which was then mounted to the M113 platform. Now, the M61 Vulcan is the same 20mm Gatling style revolving cannon that has been designed and used on aircraft from the late 1950s all the way up till even today. The unit is electrically driven and uses a unique linkless type belt ammunition system. This is different compared to some other small arms such as like an M60 or M249, where you have the ammunition which contains a shell, the projectile, and a belt which generally is disintegrating. When those weapons feed, you'll see the action cycle, the shell casing get ejected along with the link. On the M61 system, it's a bit different, where the unit just, after the round goes off, the spent casing actually gets cycled back into the system and stowed in a large drum. This is why, if anyone has ever seen a F-16 or an F-15 during a reloading process, or even the A-10, which utilizes a similar type feeding system, whenever the technician is loading the drum, you'll see empty shell casings emerge on a track out from the airplane, and then fresh ammunition get funneled in. This is to keep the continuous loop of the ammunition for its internal magazine. Now, this system worked very well in the aircraft role, and the designers in the 1960s decided to take this exact same system, but tweak it and change it and adapt it for ground role capabilities. What they did was they took the unit, they fitted inside of an armored turret, as well as mounting it onto a trailer. Now, what's unique about the ground version is that the feeding system was altered. Rather than like on the airplane variant where it stows the spent shell casings inside of its ammunition drum, with the ground version it just simply ejects the spent shells upon firing. Now, in combination of a static ground unit being developed, they also had the idea on taking this system and making it mobile. And the platform that they used to mount it on was the, at the time, ubiquitous M113. Now, automotive-wise, the M113 doesn't really change all that much. The hull itself is basically exactly the same. Where the changes are with the roof and with the interior layout. On the original M113, the original interior space was designed to house a squad of men. Well, with the Vulcan unit being fitted in, that was no longer going to be the case, and the entire rear section of the interior was dedicated to the electronics as well as the machinery required to feed the weapon. Now, outside of the crew compartment, the vehicle's roof also had to have been adapted in order to fit the new turret system. Now, with this combination, the vehicle had several advantages compared to its towed counterpart. First and foremost, being on a mobile tracked platform, the unit was fully mobile and can go just about anywhere, and more importantly, the same places where the tanks can go. On top of that, by using the M113 as the main base platform, the vehicle does have some sufficient armor protection for most moderate threats. Another good benefit that the M163 platform has was with the larger space of the base vehicle, the unit can house more ammunition compared to its towed counterpart, giving it a longer sustained rate of fire. Now, the M163 Vulcan was really part of a system where you had the Vulcan and it would work in tandem with the Chaparral. If anyone's interested, there's a really cool old Army video on YouTube that shows the two vehicles and it describes in more depth on how they get used. Now, the M163 was a very successful little vehicle. It entered service at the end of the 1960s and was eventually phased out of US military service towards the early or mid-1990s. Although the US military no longer utilizes the 163, it is still used by several other countries in the world today who have constantly upgraded and improved on the system, giving it better electronics, radars, as well as other improvements. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/72nd scale ESCI M163 anti-aircraft vehicle. Now, like you've probably seen from the pre-video bumper, the kit itself is a vintage model kit. The ESCI kits, specifically this M163 model, dates back to the late 1980s, more specifically about 1987 or so. ESCI, which is an Italian-based model company, during this time was a very prolific and popular plastic model company and were releasing a wide range of kits in various scales. Their 1/72nd scale lineup was considered to be one of their hallmarks. Now, like I mentioned with the other 1/72nd scale ESCI build videos that I've done, towards the early and mid-1990s, ESCI began to have some financial problems, and shortly before going bankrupt, they actually sold a large portion of their tooling and assets to Italy. The M163 kit in particular was one of those kits that was acquired by the other company. Now, the old ESCI M163, along with their M60A1 variants, are frequently re-released by Italy from time to time, so tracking one of these kits down is actually fairly easy. Now, oddly enough, for the box art, Italy recycled their 1/35th scale M163 anti-aircraft vehicles artwork for use on the 1/72nd scale box arts. Now, although the Italy re-releases are very common, tracking one of the original ESCI box arts down like this one here is also fairly simple to do as well. This kit here I acquired off of eBay for about $10 or so US dollars. The kit hasn't been in the stash for very long, and it's just going to be a fairly quick build for me to tackle. Now, starting with the box art, this kit here is the original release of the M163 by ESCI. Shortly before they went under in the early 1990s, Ertl began to handle the US distribution, and those utilized a slightly different box art than this one here. With this version, we have a very Tamiya-esque type layout where we have the white background with the illustration of the vehicle in the center. The illustration is fairly decently rendered. I kind of like the way the camouflage pattern was drawn out on the box art, and gives you a good idea on what the base vehicle is. The rest of the graphic design is pretty simple, very much in line with the other vehicles made by ESCI of the period. Obviously, at this point, the vehicle was brand new. And just like with the other ESCI kits of the period, you notice that the back portion of the box is just a mirror image of the front. We have the red sides with the information on the model as well as the other pertinent info. Now, let's go ahead and open up the box and dump out the contents. Just like with the other ESCI kits, they're all side opening. And that looks like everything in the box. Yep, the little decal sheet isn't stuck on the inside. Now, this M163, of course, is based off of the M113, and ESCI does have a pretty decent range of M113 pattern of vehicles. Of course, they're going to be recycling many of the basic hull components, which we can see here with the way the kit is laid out. Very similar along the lines of what Tamiya did with their 1/35 scale M113s back in the mid-1970s. Now this version here is found with this tan plastic. I believe the AMT Ertls were very similar with their plastic coloring, and if I'm not mistaken, more than likely when Italeri took over the molds and the tooling, the pieces are injection molded with that drabby Italeri color, which is found on their plastic model kits as well. Now, just like with the other ESCI kits, everything is self-contained in one sealed bag, which does consolidate everything pretty well. Let me go ahead and open up the bag so I could dump out the contents. Okay, as you can see, the kit is pretty simple in its basic breakdown. Pretty much it's just comprised of 3 runners. We have the main M113 runner over here, a lower hull, and the M163 runner. Starting with the main runner, here we have the upper hull section. Note that the rear section here is a swappable plate, which obviously is meant for modeling the M113 for the other variants that have been released by ESCI, like I was alluding to earlier. Zooming into the detailing, you can see that the detailing is basically there. It gives you a good idea on what, like for instance, the grill covers should look like. Now again, the tooling is pushing 30-something years old, so the type of quality on these kits are going to be considered a lot softer compared to the type of detailing which is found on more contemporary kits of today. Now, moving from the outside, you can see that there is some interior detailing. These here are the engine compartment bulkhead walls, which are found on the inside portion here. Here we have, of course, the rear ramp, the front bow plane, and of course, being an ESCI kit of this period, you are going to have the individual link and lang tracks. I've already gone into detail on my opinions of these. Spoiler alert, I'm not exactly a fan of them. But like I've said before, on these ESCI kits, I've seen to have a good grasp on how to put these together, and I've had some pretty good results thus far with them. Not saying I'm a fan, but I guess I can make do with them for this build. Moving our way to the running gear. Here we have, of course, the sprockets, idlers, and the road wheels. If I can get this in focus. You can see the type of detailing found on the road wheels. Not too bad, again, considering the age of the tooling. Now, just like with the other ESCI kits, the road wheels are solid, in which on a real M113 there would be 2 halves for the wheel, which would then go over the center tooth found on the tracks. On the ESCI kits, that's not the case. Now, the track links do not have any teeth or guide horns on them. They're just totally smooth on the inside, which is why they went with this type of assembly. Now, in most cases, people are going to refer to this as a ding on the ESCI kits, and there is some validity to that. Again, but for a 1/72nd scale model, it's not really that big of a deal, in my opinion. Moving from the main runner brings us to the lower hull. Lower hull has its suspension swing arms integrally molded on, and now they also went ahead and made the detailing of the shock absorbers found on the first and last swing arm torsion bars. Nice little feature, and the final drives are also present as well. On the interior portion, there is some interior detailing. Note the diamond plate. Also note that the interior does have some dings and sinks to it. I'm not sure if this was done on purpose to replicate the floorboards, as they do get, since they are sheet metal on the real units, they can get damaged and dinged up with use, or if this is just a flaw with the molding. Honestly, I can't really tell. From the lower hull brings us to the M163 turret components. Here's the top deck, the ballast tanks, which help keep this unit be able to float if it does any river crossings. Keep in mind, with the M163, it's a lot heavier compared to the standard M113, which is why for amphibious purposes, they needed these extra bulkheads added to this, or I should say ballast tanks added to the sides. Here we have also the dive plane, or the bow plane, which also acts as another flotation device. Here's the turret and the Gatling gun. The Gatling gun is molded to the turret, as you can see here, which does simplify immensely the amount of assembly required to get this unit built. The molding and detailing found on the barrels isn't bad, again, considering the age and the scale of this model. And all in all, it should make for a fairly quick build. From the runners now takes us to the instruction sheet. We're going to pick up that in a second. But as you can see, it's just standard 1980s era ESCI type illustrations. Nice little color chart for the MERDC Camouflage scheme. Yep, basically self-explanatory and should again make for a relatively simple build. The last thing to point out was what fell out earlier was the decal sheet. Now, just like with the other ESCI kits I've seen, the decal sheet is on this yellowish white paper, but the decals themselves, if I hold in the light, look to be a pretty good quality. I'm not seeing any cracks on the surface of these markings, and with any luck, they should be able to transfer just fine. Again, more information on that is to come as the video progresses. Starting with the model suspension, the components that you see here are all stock. Now, the model does utilize the individual Lincoln length suspension. Now, to assemble this model here, I used the same technique that I've basically been utilizing on the other smaller ESCI builds that I've done in the past, where the wheels and the suspension are actually temporarily fitted to the hull, and then I just build the track around it, and the entire track and wheel cluster acts as kind of like a pontoon. The units are then removed once the glue sets on the track, and the model then heads off into the remainder of the construction and the paint in that format. Like I said in the other videos, I like going with that route because trying to assemble the track after the unit is pre-painted is going to be a problematic venture, and also trying to go ahead and paint the track once the set is completely installed to the vehicle is also something that is less than ideal for the builder. By painting and building the tracks separately, this allows you to go ahead and thoroughly get the tracks fully painted and weathered along with the wheels in a nice thorough manner, and then once everything is installed at the tail end of the build, it makes for a better, more trouble-free build compared to the other ways that I mentioned. Now, for weathering the track, on the M113, the tracks are very similar to what you would find on the M109 or the M110 self-propelled gun, where we have an all-metal link, but there is a bolt-on rubber track pad on the face, and there are also another track pad found on the inner portions. On the face, it's on the M113 is this little square object that we have here, and on this model here, it is decently rendered from the kit's tooling. When it comes time for painting and weathering, obviously you don't want to have the rubber pad finished the same way as you would on the metal portions of the track. Same can also be said on the inner rubber portions as well. Now, if you look, the section here with the holes for the sprocket teeth, that would be metal, and the metal finish would be found on that, but the center here, right between the row wheels, those would be rubber pads. The tracks, like I showcased before, do not have their internal detailing. Their external face detailing is present, but the interior detailing is not. Why this is something that is mentionable for the spare track links is because on the M113, the track links are bolted face down, and you would have the guide horn tooth pointing outward. With the tracks being as they are, you're not going to have that detailing. So rather than trying to scratch build the small little guide horn for the spare tracks, I went the other route and just had the model with the spare tracks not present. In their place, I went ahead and added these small little pins here, which replicate the 4 bolts which would be found on the real M113 for securing the track. On the vehicle, in addition to a bolt, there's also a wide washer which is used to anchor the track link in place. Now, moving from the spare tracks takes us again to the side skirt. Now, the side skirt on the model here is a stock unit, but one thing I want to point out when it comes to time for painting is the center portion. On the M113, the center portion of the side skirt is actually made from a thick industrial rubber. The rubber is then secured to the side of the hull via this steel strap that we have on the top, and it actually anchors it in place. Now, when you're painting your vehicle, you could render it in two different ways. You can have it with the natural color of the rubber, like I did on this build here, or you can have it oversprayed with the paint and the camouflage. This was not uncommon on vehicles in the field. If you are going to go this route, however, you want to keep in mind that when it comes time for the weathering, first, you don't want to weather it like you do the rest of the vehicle because it will be an error with the material. But when the rubber is oversprayed with the paints that are used for the rest of the vehicle, it tends to flake and chip off very quickly and very easily. So if you're going to go with that route, you can make it where you have the paint in that decayed, decrepit state. Could be something cool to look into for anyone who's doing any type of an M113 platform. Moving from the side skirts brings us to the rear hull detailing, and the detailing here is pretty much stock out of the box, with the exception of the two little grab handles that we have here on the two corners. Now, on the real vehicles, these things aren't so much grab handles as they are brush guards, which protect the rear taillights from any sort of damage from objects which can hit them. Now, on the stock ESCI kit, these pieces are missing, and for this model here, I fabricated them out of thin pieces of floor wire. They were simply just bent to shape and mounted to two little holes that I drilled into the rear plate via pin vise. Another bit of detailing that was added, but unfortunately was covered up by the detailing, was the bilge pump holes that are found on the front corner here of the vehicle, and there's also one located on the back. Now, these holes were absent on the ESCI kit, but were added via the pin vise and was a simple addition. However, once the side ballast tanks were added and the other rear detailing added, it kind of covered everything up. So it's one of those details that were added, but you're not going to miss it if you don't do it on your own build. Now, on the real vehicle, the purpose of the bilge pump was, again, keep in mind the vehicles were intended to be amphibious. And if you spring a leak on the inside of your vehicle, you need a way to get that water out before you end up in Davy Jones' locker. The bilge system was the system which would assist in that and would basically prevent you from, would actually slow you down with your sinking so you could get to the shore before you go ahead and fully submerge. But that's, I guess, a topic for another video. However, while on the topic of being amphibious, the M163 was unique in having these very large ballast tank blisters that were located on each side. The purpose of the ballast tanks was, again, for amphibious reasons. Now, although the stock M113 did not need these ballast tanks fitted, with the extra weight of the Vulcan cannon as well as its ammunition system, this required the use or the addition of these extra ballast tanks that we have here on the sides. Now, it's not uncommon to see M163s without these ballast tanks fitted. While on the ballast tanks, that's exactly what we have here on the front dive plane, which is yet another bow ballast tank. Now, this system here is seen on other renditions of the M113 family as well. And it's not uncommon to see this unit fitted on several versions that are floating around even to this day. Now, while on the topic of the bow plane, the ESCI kit is nicely engineered with the way this piece is executed. The bow plane ballast tank here is an optional piece, and you can build the model with the piece omitted, which is, again, a nice touch. Also with the piece, the way it's engineered, you'll notice that it has a nice hollow feel to it, which is true to form of the real counterpart. Now, again, on the topic of the bow plane itself, what a lot of people who build these models don't realize is that the bow plane was actually made from a piece of really thick plywood, about 3/4 of an inch or so. Now, the piece was just, again, a plank of plywood with some metal components that were fastened to it, and there's a top and bottom rigidity portion that was just a steel channel with some bolts. Now, why this is relevant and important for anyone who's modeling the M113 platform in one way, shape, or form or another, if you're weathering this piece, keep that in mind so you don't want to weather it like it's made from the same type of metal alloy which is found on the rest of the vehicle. Instead, you want to weather it as it would be, well, like a piece of wood. So that's another thing that a lot of people seem to miss when building one of these models. Now, from the bow plane brings us to the front and the rear lifting hooks. Now, these are probably some of the most iconic and important detailing found on the entire vehicle, and on the ESCI kit, they are missing. So the ones that you see here were fabricated by myself. Now, unlike most grab handles and hooks where they're just basic round bar or round stock, on the M113, the lift hooks were their own proprietary set. And on the M113, they were actually made from a cast hook type piece that was really flat in its overall appearance. Now, to replicate that on the model here, I took floor wire, bent it to the shape of the hook, like you can see here on the front, but in order to give it the better appearance, I went ahead and I flattened it with a hammer. This gives you the correct shape of the piece, but it gives you that nice flat look that is found on the real counterpart. This here is a great way to help improve the look on these ESCI or Italeri 1/72 scale M113s. Now, from the hooks brings us to the top deck, and this again takes us to a very iconic bit of detailing for the M113 that is absent on the ESCI tooling, and that's of the little guards that we have here for the antenna bases. Now, these little fittings are one of the most eye-catching bits of detailing found on this pattern of vehicle. Now, like I said before, they are absent on the ESCI kit, and the versions that you see here on this model are fabricated out of small bits of floor wire. Now, the piece itself is fabricated out of two pieces. We have a center portion over here that's round, and then there's a small little support that emerges from the side. This is exactly how they look on the real counterpart. And luckily for the M163, there was only two of these pieces that needed to have been fabricated, as opposed to I don't even know how many are on the standard one, but I do know it is more than two, and they come in different lengths. By adding these bits of detailing here also greatly improves the look of the model. Now, you'll also notice that I only fitted one antenna wire to the vehicle, and this is also tends to be common, as although there are provisions for mounting more than one antenna and antenna base, generally one is the version that's utilized and the other one's just a dead spare. Now, for this vehicle here, this is actually also important because if you try to fit another antenna wire, you're not going to be able to get the turret in place because of the way the turret lock system is configured. In fact, with the wire antenna that was added, I can only rotate the turret in a certain arc of motion because this guy here inhibits it from going full 360. From there, this now brings us to the vehicle's interior. Now, regrettably, you're not going to be able to see it in this lighting, but the model does have some basic interior detailing. Now, by interior detailing, this is going to comprise of pretty much the wall that separates the crew compartment from the engine compartment. However, the interior is lacking any other bits of equipment, and for this vehicle, that would include the ammunition storage system for the Vulcan. Now, the vehicle does have a nicely rendered floorboard system, and you can see here from the photographs that I took during the build that I went ahead and thoroughly painted and weathered the interior section just in case any portion of it is visible through the top open turret of this vehicle. Now, the interior was painted with that blue coloring, which is typical for American post-World War II military vehicles. And the floor itself I painted with a dark olive drab coloring, which is also something that is commonly seen. Now, moving up to the turret on the model here is very, very basic with just about everything you can imagine. Starting with the Vulcan, the barrels on the system here are the molded in ones. Now, although they are basic, but with the way the piece is molded, you can tell that the barrels are separate from each other, which is a nice touch. However, the business end here does not have any sort of detailing whatsoever, and unlike many of my other builds where I take a pin vise and a small Dremel bit and try to drill out machine gun barrels, for the Vulcan here, that just wasn't possible. With the number of holes that are found on this section over here, trying to carefully drill them out with a pin vise in this scale would have been a fool's errand, and it would have just led the problem. So I left it basically stock as is and just went over with the dry brushing and a little bit of airbrushing. Now, for the interior portion, there literally is none on this model. The seat that you see here was fabricated out of a thin piece of aluminum, and I tried to mimic as much as possible the stock seat found on the Vulcan turret system. Now, the seat is, again, it's very simplistic on the real vehicle, and this one here basically gives you the look and feel of the unit. Now, however, the remainder of the receiver for the Vulcan is just not present with this molding, and for this model here, being this scale, I was able to just live with this fact. But if you are a stickler for detail and are a hardcore Braille scale enthusiast, this might be something that you're going to want to address in one way, shape, or form or another. If you could 3D print or possibly just cobble something together, it will definitely help your build. Now from there, this brings us to the radar. The radar, again, extremely basic, and the addition that I made was of these bars that come out from these three sections here. These are absent on the stock unit, and with the addition of these really helped the look. Now, later versions of the M163 had a fiberglass dome located in this section over here, which concealed all this detailing that you see here. Again, it's just another option for the builder to add to one of these pieces. However, like I said before, the stock kit does not give you anything for this detailing. From there, this now brings us to the paint and the markings. Now for the model's camouflage pattern, I went with a MERDC camouflage scheme, which for this vehicle here is more than appropriate. The MERDC camouflage pattern was a camouflage system which was used by the US military from the late 70s throughout the 1980s. Basically, it was a universal camouflage scheme where it was a paint-by-number system where if you change one or two of the colors, the camouflage pattern can be adapted for whatever environment you are using it for. This particular version here with this set of colors is known as US Europe Winter Verdant. Now for the application of the camouflage, for the blotch layout, I went ahead and used the template system for the M163 that was used by the US military. In the description below, I have a link to a website that is a fantastic source for your MERDC camouflage patterns. There they have all of the official government color swatches for the different variations, as well as all of the paint-by-number templates for just about every US military vehicle of the period, the M163 included. Now with the blotches all figured out, the paint was added with a paintbrush on this model. Now, when it comes to the MERDC pattern, this is not inaccurate because these patterns here were applied in a number of different ways. Depending on the equipment, the patterns could have been applied via a paintbrush or a spray gun if available, and I've seen instances where there was a mix between the two. So there are a lot of variations available for the builder. Now, one of the reasons why I went with a paintbrush was because of the model's small scale. Trying to apply this pattern with an airbrush would be very difficult, specifically when it came time to having all of those little swish and branch lines that you see littered all over this vehicle. For 1/72nd scale, as well as even 1/35th scale, I really recommend the MERDC patterns being done with a paintbrush type format. Now, if we recall from the unboxing portion of the video, the kit did supply you with a set of water slide decals. Now, you'll notice that there are no decals found on this model, and the reason for that is quite simple. The decals just did not hold up. Now, this is something that I noticed is a recurring feature on these ESCI models. The decal sheets just did not hold up with their age, and after 30 plus years, when the decal hits the water, they just decompose and just brittle up and basically just Thanos snap away. So regrettably, the decals were not able to be salvaged, but that's not a problem because these MERDC camouflage vehicles in some cases just did not have any markings on them. Now, if anyone is working on one of these kits and gets one of the newer Italeri releases, the decals are going to be another story since they are modern printings and should go on the vehicle without any problems. From there, this now brings us to skill level and recommendation. Now, although the model itself is relatively simplistic with its overall parts layout, because of the individual link and length tracks, I really cannot recommend this to a beginner. Someone who has a beginner skill set are going to get pretty frustrated with assembling those tracks, and it's just going to lead to a big mess in a short amount of time. Because of that, this model here is best left for someone who's an intermediate to an advanced range builder. Because of the model's small size, anyone who's an avid Braille scale fan would greatly appreciate this kit here added to their collection. Other people who would appreciate this build would be anyone who's a fan of post-World War II or Cold War era armor, as well as people who just dig and collect the many variants of the M113 platform. With the wide variation of this vehicle's use, this opens up a lot of potentials for the builder to render this vehicle in a number of different ways. While on that token, this model here builds great for just a simple type build like I have here for just shelf display, but it can also be greatly used to enhance a diorama setting. 1/72 scale is known to be a fantastic diorama scale because of its smaller size. You can have a lot of vehicles and things going on in a setting without taking up a terrible whole lot of space. Now, with the vehicle also being 172, there's a humongous infrastructure of not just accessories, but also vehicles in the same scale. And with this being a post-World War II vehicle, there are also many other contemporaries that can be had, such as the M60A1, the M1 Abrams, as well as several others, to name a few. Another person who I'd recommend this kit to would be anyone who's an avid fan of building and collecting old retro model kits. With this model's tooling here dating back to the 1980s, this definitely fits into that little niche. Now, these kits themselves are relatively easy to track down in both sizes, with the ESCI brand name, like the one that you see here. But like I also mentioned, this kit was re-released on several occasions by Italeri. Because of that, tracking one down is going to be relatively easy to do compared to some of the other more collectible and limited edition model kits that have been released throughout the years. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this 1/72 scale M163 Vulcan self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, be it small-scale model showcase videos like this guy over here, or the larger project update videos when they get posted. Another way to stay in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have more photographs of this particular build that have been posted, along with the other larger and smaller scale builds that have been showcased on the channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Till next time.